Rachel Morgan stood motionless in the rainwater streaming down her face and soaking through her light jacket. The digital clock on her phone read 2:17 a.m. She stared at the familiar two-story suburban house, its windows glowing with warm light despite the late hour. Through the living room window, she could see the silhouette of her sister Amanda, moving around accompanied by the faint sound of laughter drifting through the night air. For 22 years, Rachel had called this place home. Tonight, with her small suitcase at her feet and raindrops mingling with silent tears on her cheeks, she knew she would never call it home again. "I always knew this moment would come," Rachel whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the gentle patter of rain. "The moment when I finally stop being invisible." Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own family? Like your achievements, your pain, your very existence were somehow less substantial than everyone else's? Rachel had lived that reality her entire life, watching from the shadows, as her sister Amanda basked in the spotlight of their parents' undivided attention. But today, something had changed. Today, Rachel Morgan had graduated from the University of Michigan with honors. And today, like so many days before, her family had chosen her sister instead. Rachel took one last look at the house, memorizing the way the porch light cast shadows across the familiar red door, then picked up her suitcase. The wheels made a soft grinding sound against the wet pavement, as she turned away, each step carrying her further from everything she had known and closer to a future that for once would be entirely her own. The price of silence, she thought, is far too high to pay anymore. 8 hours earlier, Rachel had stood in the vast stadium of the University of Michigan, the deep blue graduation gown billowing around her slender frame. Thousands of students filled the arena, their faces alight with pride and accomplishment. Parents and family members packed the stands, waving banners and bouquets, their cheers creating a symphony of celebration. Rachel scanned the sea of faces, her eyes repeatedly returning to the three empty seats in Section C, Row 12. Seats she had reserved months ago. Seats that should have held her mother, father, and sister. Seats that now stood as stark reminders of her perpetual status as an afterthought in the Morgan family. When the announcer called her name, Rachel Morgan, Bachelor of Arts in Psychology with honors, she walked across the stage with measured steps. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted her diploma. The polite applause from strangers washed over her, but there were no familiar voices calling her name, no flash of a camera capturing this milestone for the family album. Just another moment of achievement witnessed by no one who was supposed to care. That morning, Rachel had awakened early excitement bubbling through her veins, despite years of learned caution. She had meticulously applied her makeup, styled her hair, and put on the new dress she had saved up to buy specifically for this occasion. She looked at herself in the mirror and allowed hope to flutter in her chest. Perhaps today would be different. Perhaps today she would matter. Then her phone had buzzed with a text message. The familiar knot formed in her stomach as she read the words from her mother. "Please understand, Amanda just had a panic attack. We have to stay and calm her down." No apology, no congratulations, not even a promise to try to make it later. Just the bare minimum explanation for why once again Amanda's needs superseded Rachel's milestone. Rachel stared at the message, waiting for more words to appear. Something like, "We're proud of you," or "We'll celebrate when you get home." But the screen remained stubbornly unchanged, displaying only the single text that effectively erased 4 years of hard work and dedication. Standing in her dorm room, graduation cap in hand, Rachel felt something inside her fracture, a clean, decisive break that seemed almost audible in the quiet room. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and made a promise to herself that this would be the last time she would allow herself to be rendered invisible. The stadium buzzed with celebration around her. Families hugged their graduates, cameras flashed, bouquets exchanged hands. Rachel stood alone holding her diploma, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. She asked a classmate she barely knew to take a few photos of her. When she looked at them later, she barely recognized herself. The smile was so strained, so hollow, it belonged on the face of a stranger. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, Rachel walked out while others lingered, savoring their moment of glory. The June sun beat down mercilessly, heating the campus pathways and causing the decorative ribbons to flutter in the warm breeze. But Rachel felt cold inside, as if something vital had been extinguished. The day she had anticipated for years, the culmination of sleepless nights studying and working part-time jobs to cover expenses, her parents' wouldn't had become just another reminder of a painful truth. In the Morgan family, Rachel had never been the priority. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, as if all your efforts and emotions were never truly seen? If you have, you might understand the particular ache that had become Rachel's constant companion. Rachel's earliest memories were colored by this imbalance. Life inside their Detroit suburban home had always revolved around a single name, Amanda. 3 years older than Rachel, Amanda had somehow been designated as the fragile one, the special one, the one deserving of protection and attention. Rachel, by contrast, had been labeled the strong one, the independent one, designations that sounded like compliments but functioned as convenient excuses for neglect. The family dinner table served as a stage where this dynamic played out nightly. If Amanda expressed a preference for a particular meal, that became the menu. If she complained about the seasoning, their mother would immediately adjust the dish or order takeout. Many times when Rachel reached for the last piece of chicken, she would hear her father say, "Leave it for your sister. You don't need much. You're strong enough." And so Rachel would silently withdraw her hand, swallowing both hunger and hurt. Family vacations were no different. Once, when Rachel was 12, she had spent weeks researching the Grand Canyon for a geography project, developing a passionate desire to see its magnificent sprawl with her own eyes. She had gathered brochures and planned an itinerary, presenting it hopefully to her parents. They had seemed impressed, even enthusiastic. Then Amanda had mentioned wanting to visit Los Angeles instead to take Instagram photos on the beach. The family went to Los Angeles. Rachel still remembered sitting on the sand at Santa Monica collecting seashells, while Amanda posed for countless photos, the bitter question echoing in her mind. Had anyone in her family ever truly listened to what she wanted? Birthdays marked the inequality with painful clarity. When Amanda turned 15, their parents threw an elaborate party at an Italian restaurant, complete with a live band and a guest list that filled every table. When Rachel turned 15 3 years later, her celebration consisted of a small cake hastily purchased from the neighborhood bakery. The candles were lit and blown out in less than 5 minutes because her parents needed to drive Amanda to rehearsal for her school play. "We'll make it up to you next year," they promised. But next year never came. When Rachel was 16, she won the state science scholarship, an achievement her teacher described as nearly impossible for any student to attain. She had carried the certificate home, heart pounding with hope for approval, or perhaps even a warm embrace. Her parents had glanced at it, set it down on the kitchen counter, and said, "Good, you've always been smart. That's nothing unusual." Then they immediately turned to ask Amanda about the number of likes on her latest social media photo. That very evening, the whole family went out to celebrate Amanda's Instagram milestone of reaching 3,000 likes on a single post. Rachel sat at the restaurant table, listening to the clinking glasses and cheerful conversation, feeling as though her chest might collapse under the weight of her invisibility. "You don't need much. Save it for your sister. She's weaker. She needs more care." The refrain played like a twisted lullaby throughout Rachel's childhood and adolescence. Her parents used her resilience as justification for their neglect, as an excuse not to provide the tenderness and recognition every child deserves. Over time, Rachel learned to swallow her feelings, to stay silent, to become the child who never asked for anything. She was always the one giving up the nicer bedroom, the better meal, even the rare moments of recognition. And worst of all, she convinced herself it was normal, that if she just stayed patient a little longer one day, they would finally see her worth. But that day never came. The favoritism stretched from the smallest things to the biggest milestones. When Amanda failed her college entrance exam, she cried for a week. Their parents immediately hired an expensive tutor and arranged special consideration for her to enroll in a private college. Meanwhile, when Rachel struggled with SAT preparation, she studied alone, researching online resources and pushing herself without any support. Her parents dismissed her stress with casual remarks. "You're independent. You'll be fine." They spoke as though independence were a gift, but in reality, it was just an excuse to abandon her when she needed them most. Rachel grew up believing she was nothing more than a shadow behind the spotlight her parents had built for Amanda. No matter how hard she tried or how much she achieved, her success was never significant enough to break through the invisible wall separating her from her family's affection. The graduation ceremony had merely been the final confirmation of a truth Rachel had been avoiding for 22 years. In her parents' eyes, she was only the strong child, the one who didn't need care. But that very label had carved a wound deep inside her, one she hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment of absolute abandonment. That night, as the stadium lights dimmed and the sounds of celebration faded, Rachel returned to her small apartment near campus. The room greeted her with silence, dark and still. She laid her cap and gown on the desk, her hands trembling, as though she had just lost something precious that could never be recovered. In that moment of desolation, Rachel told herself that at the very least, a comforting message from her parents would help ease the pain. She unlocked her phone, her heart pounding with one last fragile thread of hope. The screen illuminated with two brief messages so cold and detached that she had to read them several times to believe they were real. The first was from her mother. "Sorry, honey. Amanda had a breakdown after fighting with her boyfriend. You understand." The second came from her father. "We'll celebrate another day." Just two terse sentences. No congratulations, no expressions of pride, not even the slightest acknowledgement of the moment she had worked toward for 4 years. Every effort, every sleepless night spent writing essays, every hour of anxiety before exams, every tear shed in solitude, all reduced to a hollow apology and an empty promise. Rachel collapsed onto her bed, clutching her phone, as if it were the only thing holding her together. A question echoed in her mind, one she had avoided for 22 years. Why was she always the second choice? Or worse, not even a choice at all? She thought back to all the times she had tried to impress them, desperate for her parents to notice her. From the state science scholarship at 16 to the university research award to the nights she worked extra shifts just to pay her own tuition. All of it had been brushed aside, dismissed as expected, because she was independent. Meanwhile, her sister Amanda only had to shed a few tears over a trip that didn't go as planned, a broken relationship, or a photo that didn't get enough likes, and her parents would drop everything to console and protect her. In that moment, Rachel realized the unfairness she had endured wasn't just a family habit. It had been an invisible sentence hanging over her for 22 years. And as she stared at her phone rereading those two detached messages, she finally understood that her graduation had never been important in their eyes. It was nothing more than a minor event they were willing to discard to tend to another of Amanda's emotional storms. She sank into her pillow, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. She hated herself for hoping things might be different, for convincing herself that today would finally make them see her in a new light. In the darkness, Rachel could hear the pounding of her own heart, each beat crashing against her chest like a warning. This was the breaking point, the final drop that made the glass overflow. She no longer had the strength to keep being the obedient, patient daughter, endlessly waiting for love from people who had never considered her important in the first place. Her phone kept lighting up with notifications from friends and classmates. "Congratulations, Rachel. So proud of you. You really shone today." She read each message feeling both warmth and bitterness. Strangers and acquaintances remembered to celebrate her, while her family, the very people whose approval she had craved most, had vanished, as if she didn't exist. She set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Her entire childhood and adolescence replayed like a film in reverse. The meals she had to give up, the holidays she had to step aside for, the awards, ignored the hidden tears. Now all of it had culminated on a day that should have been the happiest of her life. Rachel sat up, took a deep breath, and faced a painful truth. In her parents' eyes, she was not a source of pride or a priority, but simply the backdrop that allowed them to continue worshiping Amanda. This injustice was no longer a series of small slights. It had become a wound bleeding quietly inside her for 22 years. And that night, in the silence of her apartment, she knew her endurance had reached its limit. She could no longer live as the extra child. The next morning, Rachel drove back to the house in the suburbs of Detroit, the place where she had grown up for 22 years, yet had never truly belonged. The familiar road lined with summer maples no longer gave her the sense of peace it once had. She pulled up in front of the garage, took a long breath, and stepped inside. The sound of the television carried from the living room so familiar, it made her throat tighten. But inside her, the anger from the night before still burned fiercely, pushing her to finally confront them once and for all. Her parents sat on the sofa while Amanda lounged in the armchair, dressed in a pale pink satin pajama, said her face lightly made up, even though it was only morning. The sight made Rachel's throat constrict. Last night she had stood alone before thousands, while here they were tending to Amanda over what Rachel now suspected was another manufactured crisis. She stood at the doorway, her voice trembling but firm. College graduation only happens once. You skipped mine just because she was crying. The air in the room froze instantly. Her father looked up, his brow furrowed. Rachel, don't start with that attitude. You have to understand yesterday was awful for Amanda. Amanda immediately sighed, placing a hand over her chest, as if she had survived some terrible ordeal. I had a fight with my boyfriend. Do you know how painful that feels? Her voice quivered, her eyes shimmering with tears, as though a single blink would send them falling. If you had a heart, you would understand why Mom and Dad had to stay with me. Rachel felt something erupting inside her. And what about my heart? My graduation, the one day that comes only once in 4 years. Why didn't anyone think of me? Why are her feelings always more important than everything else while I'm never even considered? Her mother cut in, her tone soft, but laced with reproach. Rachel, you're being selfish. Family means sacrificing for one another. Amanda is more fragile than you. You're strong. You're independent. You should understand. Rachel laughed bitterly, the sound echoing through the room, leaving the three of them stunned. Strong, independent. That's not a compliment. It's just the excuse you've used to neglect me for 22 years. Every time there's a conflict, you choose her. Every joy has to revolve around her. No matter how hard I've tried, it's never meant anything in your eyes. Amanda furrowed her brows, her voice feigning softness but dripping with disdain. You always think of yourself as the victim. You have no idea the pressure I'm under. I'm the one expected to succeed, to look perfect, to be happy. One bad day for me is worth more of the family's concern than some ceremony you can just watch again on video. Rachel's fists clenched so tightly, her nails dug into her skin as she struggled to contain the rage boiling inside her. What did you just say? That one bad day of yours is more important than a milestone I'll never live again. Do you even hear yourself? Her father slammed his hand down on the table, his tone heavy and final. That's enough, Rachel. You're blowing this out of proportion. We'll celebrate later. So what's the big deal? You need to learn to think about the family. Her mother nodded in agreement. Exactly. Would you really let one ceremony make you dismiss your family's love? You should know how to yield. Yield. That word cut into Rachel like a knife. Memories came flooding back. The last slice of cake she had to give up for Amanda. The family vacation rerouted for Amanda. The awards forgotten because of Amanda. While she swallowed her tears and pretended it was fine. This time Rachel couldn't stay silent. Her voice broke into sobs echoing through the room like thunder. For 22 years, I've yielded enough. I have never been put first, never been valued. I've only been a shadow in this house, existing solely to let her shine. The room fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of Rachel's choked sobs. She stared into their eyes, but there was no warmth left, only a terrifying sense of distance. Amanda lowered her head, yet the faint curl of a smug smile lingered on her lips. Her parents avoided her gaze, as if the truth she had just spoken was too heavy for them to face. But Rachel already knew the answer that had been clear in their hearts all along. She had never been chosen, never been a priority, and she would never be their pride. The echo of Rachel's outburst was still hanging in the living room when the front door suddenly swung open. Her parents flinched, and Amanda's head snapped up, her face paling instantly. Standing at the threshold was her grandfather, Richard Evans, tall and lean, but steady clad in his familiar beige khaki coat. Though now well into his 70s, once a renowned lawyer in Grand Rapids, the sharpness in his eyes and the firmness of his steps carried a weight that demanded respect. His gaze swept across the room, lingering on Rachel's tear-streaked face and her parents' uneasy expressions before he spoke in a low, commanding voice. "What's going on here?" No one answered. The room sank into a tense stillness, the ticking of the clock, the only sound. Rachel drew in a long breath, the tears still burning hot on her cheeks. In that moment, she knew she could no longer remain silent. This was her only chance to tell it all, to strip bare the truth she had buried for 22 years. She turned to her grandfather, her voice trembling but fierce. "Grandpa, I can't take it anymore. Since I was a child, I've always had to give in, always been treated like an outsider. My birthdays were never celebrated properly, while Amanda's were always grand. When I earned a scholarship, my parents barely looked at it before setting it aside. But if Amanda posted a single photo, the whole family went out to celebrate. And now, even my graduation, the most important moment of my life, they abandoned me. Just because she had a fight with her boyfriend and cried." Rachel spoke without pausing, each word tearing at her throat. Every memory that spilled out was like a knife twisting in her chest. But she kept going, because her grandfather needed to know everything, without a single detail left behind. "I have tried my best to be the pride of this family, but never, never once have they seen me. I am just a shadow. I am just the girl who has to sacrifice so that she can shine." Her voice broke. Her hands clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. Her grandfather stood still for several seconds, his face shifting from shock to a grave heaviness. Finally, he turned to her parents, his gaze sharp as a blade. "What Rachel just said, is it true?" Her father swallowed hard, while her mother quickly folded her hands together, her voice trembling. "Dad, it's not the way she makes it sound. I only wanted peace in the house. Rachel's fine, really, but Amanda is more fragile. She needs us more." Her words trailed off, sounding less like an explanation and more like a weak excuse. Her grandfather closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, his gaze harsher than Rachel had ever seen. "Do you know something? For the past 5 years, I've been the one quietly paying the mortgage on this house. I've been the one keeping your small business from collapsing. Every month I sent money with the belief that you were raising both of these girls fairly, that Rachel was being loved and cared for just as much as Amanda. But today, I see that trust has been betrayed." The entire room seemed to collapse. Her parents sat frozen, their faces pale with shock. Rachel's heart pounded wildly as the realization hit her. Their family's financial stability all these years hadn't come from her parents' efforts, but from her grandfather quietly standing behind them. Amanda was the only one to break the silence, and as always, she believed she could twist the situation with her false fragility. "Grandpa," she said sweetly, with a hint of reproach, "you don't understand. My mental health is very important. If Rachel had her graduation yesterday, while I was suffering, I would have completely fallen apart. Shouldn't the family prioritize my emotional well-being? A graduation can always be replayed on video, but my feelings—" "Enough, Amanda." Her grandfather's voice cut through her words, deep and resolute, silencing her instantly. "You are 25 years old, no longer a child, who can wield tears as a weapon. Do you even hear what you just said? You believe your heartbreak over a boyfriend leaving you is more important than your sister's milestone of becoming an adult. You think the whole world should revolve around you." His face was so stern that even her parents dared not speak. Then he turned to Rachel, his aged eyes sharp yet filled with compassion. "Rachel, I am sorry for letting you endure this for so long. I should have seen it sooner." He shifted his gaze back to her parents, his voice striking like a gavel on the table. "From this day forward, I am cutting off all support. You will take care of your own lives. I will no longer enable this injustice and deceit." The room sank into a deadly silence. Her parents sat in shock while Amanda's mouth hung open, her face stripped of its usual confidence. Rachel stood there, her chest rising and falling torn between pain and relief. A part of her felt shattered, but another part felt free. For the first time in her life, the truth had been spoken aloud, and for the first time, she wasn't carrying it all alone. Before she could even gather herself, her grandfather turned fully toward her, his gaze softening, his voice lowered steady and warm, yet resolute. "Rachel, would you like to come live with me? My home in Grand Rapids will always have a place for you. You don't need to endure this injustice any longer." Hearing those words, Rachel's whole body trembled. For years, she had longed for someone to see her, to understand her, to offer her a way out. Now it was truly happening. She nodded, tears streaming uncontrollably, each drop burning against her cheeks. "Yes, Grandpa, I want to." The words left her lips like a release. She was crying as she spoke, but this time the tears weren't just from pain. They carried a spark of hope, a light finally breaking through the darkness. Immediately, her parents jumped to their feet, panic etched across their faces. Her father rushed forward, his voice urgent. "Dad, you can't do this. If you take her away, how are we supposed to survive? The company is struggling. This house is still under the bank's loan. We need your support." Her mother's voice shook as she followed tears brimming in her eyes, though not for Rachel, but for the looming loss of their monthly lifeline. "Dad, we know we've been unfair at times, but it's not as bad as she makes it sound. I just wanted peace in the house. Please don't cut us off. We're begging you." Rachel stood there listening to every word of their desperate pleading, and a cold bitterness rose inside her. Not once did they beg her to stay. Not once did they plead out of fear of losing their youngest daughter. They cried and begged her grandfather only because they feared losing the money. That truth hit her like a final blow, shattering every last illusion she had about family love. She wiped her tears, but this time it was so she could see clearly, so she could etch it deep into memory. They did not regret abandoning her. They only regretted the thought of losing their financial lifeline. Her grandfather raised his hand, silencing all their excuses. "Enough. I trusted you for 5 years, and in return I received nothing but deceit. You do not deserve another cent. From this day forward, take care of yourselves." His voice struck through the room like a gavel in a courtroom, absolute and undeniable. Rachel turned away, unwilling to hear another word. Upstairs, she pulled out the old suitcase that had been tucked in the corner of her closet since high school. Each item she placed inside carried a sting of pain, but also a strange lightness. A few sets of clothes, her laptop, the thick journals she had filled over the years, a handful of her favorite books. She looked around the room that had been hers for 22 years. The pale blue walls, the worn desk, the window where she used to sit watching the rain, wishing for a real family. Now she was leaving not with regret, but with freedom. Downstairs, the sound of arguments still echoed. Her parents continued pleading with her grandfather, while Amanda sat in silence, her face pale, her eyes red, not from sorrow for Rachel, but from realizing that this time her tears no longer carried any weight. Rachel closed her suitcase and pulled the zipper shut, the sharp sound slicing through the air like a declaration. She was ready. When she descended the stairs, her grandfather was already waiting, his gaze steady and unwavering. Her parents rushed toward them, but not to stop Rachel. They clung to her grandfather instead. "Dad, please think about this. If Rachel leaves, the neighbors will talk. They'll say we failed to raise our daughter. Don't do this." Their words made Rachel let out a bitter laugh. Even now, they cared more about appearances than about their own child. She rolled her suitcase to her grandfather's side and lifted her head high, feeling as though she had just broken free from a cage that had trapped her for far too long. Her grandfather placed his hand firmly on her shoulder and said in a low, steady voice, "Let's go, Rachel. I'm taking you home." Together they turned and walked away, leaving behind the pleas and the hollow sobs. Her parents called her name, but in their voices there was no love, only panic at the thought of losing the money that had sustained them. Rachel didn't look back. The door slammed shut behind her, like a final period at the end of 22 years spent living as a shadow. Now standing in the rain at 2:17 a.m., Rachel watched the light in her sister's window. The house that had never truly been her home faded into the darkness as she turned away, wheeling her small suitcase behind her, each step carrying her toward a new beginning. Have you ever walked away from something that was slowly destroying you? The pain of leaving mixed with the breathtaking relief of freedom. As Rachel moved through the rain-slicked streets, she felt the weight of 2 decades lifting from her shoulders. The price of her silence had been her entire sense of self. But tonight she had finally spoken. Tonight she had finally been heard. And though the path ahead was uncertain for the first time in her life, Rachel Morgan belonged completely to herself. That night, Rachel sat in her grandfather's car, with the suitcase resting in the back seat. The streetlights of Detroit cast their glow across his face, illuminating the deep lines of age, but also the sharp, unwavering brightness in his eyes. He looked at her through the rearview mirror, giving a slight nod. "You've been very brave, Rachel. This should have happened long ago." Rachel leaned her head against the window, tears rolling down her cheeks, but this time they didn't taste of bitterness. Instead, she felt light, as if she had just stepped out of a suffocating dark room and breathed in the air of freedom for the first time. The house behind her, the place she once called family, was now nothing more than a cruel memory. She knew that from this night forward, her life was turning to a new page. The highway stretched before them, a ribbon of darkness, punctuated by the rhythmic sweep of headlights. Rachel watched the familiar landmarks of her childhood grow smaller in the side mirror, until they disappeared completely. Each mile created distance not just in space, but in time, separating the Rachel who had accepted invisibility from the Rachel who had finally chosen to be seen. "Your grandmother always worried about you," her grandfather said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "She saw something in you from the time you were little, a spark they seemed determined to dim." Rachel turned to look at him, surprised. Her grandmother had passed away when she was 14, but she remembered the woman's warm hands and the way she always seemed to find Rachel when she was hiding hurt after another incident of Amanda being chosen first. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" The question escaped before Rachel could stop it, carrying years of unspoken hurt. Her grandfather's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I thought I was helping by supporting your family financially. I believed your father's stories about business struggles, about needing just a little more time." His voice grew heavy with regret. "I convinced myself that things must be fair at home, that they were good parents in ways I couldn't see from a distance." The car slowed as they approached a red light. In the sudden stillness, her grandfather turned to meet her eyes directly. "I was wrong, Rachel, and for that I am deeply sorry." The simple acknowledgement of her pain, the validation of her experience after years of gaslighting and dismissal, broke something open inside Rachel. A dam of emotions she had carefully maintained crumbled, and she began to sob deep, body-shaking cries that carried the weight of 22 years of swallowed grief. Her grandfather reached across the console and took her hand, saying nothing, simply allowing her to release what she had held inside for so long. They sat that way until the light turned green, connected by understanding and the promise of a different future. Life at her grandfather's house began like a fresh wind filling lungs that had been suffocating for too long. The spacious home in Grand Rapids carried an atmosphere entirely different from the tense house in Detroit. Here, everything was quiet, warm, and most importantly, Rachel no longer felt the need to measure every word or movement to avoid upsetting someone. The house itself seemed to welcome her. A century-old Victorian with high ceilings, wooden floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot, and walls lined with books that her grandfather had collected throughout his life. Her room overlooked a small garden, where birds gathered each morning, their songs waking her, instead of the familiar sound of Amanda's complaints. In Grand Rapids, Rachel no longer walked on trembling feet, no longer lived in constant fear of someone else's moods. Each morning, she and her grandfather had breakfast in the sunlit kitchen, he with his newspaper, and she preparing for the day ahead. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch watching the Michigan sky stretch wide, with the colors of sunset talking about plans for the future. For the first time in her life, Rachel was being asked what she wanted. Her thoughts, her preferences, her dreams were suddenly valid, worthy of consideration. The simplicity of this recognition nearly overwhelmed her at times, bringing tears to her eyes, when her grandfather would ask questions as basic as, "What would you like for dinner, Rachel?" or "Which museum should we visit this weekend?" 2 weeks after her arrival, she sat with her grandfather in his home office, surrounded by law books and the lingering scent of pipe tobacco, though he hadn't smoked in years. "I've been thinking," he said, setting down his reading glasses, "about your future. You have your psychology degree now. What do you want to do with it?" Rachel hesitated, so accustomed to diminishing her aspirations in the presence of others. "I've always been interested in graduate school," she said carefully, "for clinical psychology, but it's expensive and—" "Apply," he interrupted gently, "to any school you want. Money isn't an issue." "But Grandpa, you've already done so much. I can work, save up." "Rachel," he leaned forward, his eyes serious, "listen to me. Your sister had everything handed to her on a silver platter. She never had to earn anything, and look what it's done to her character. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't work, you should, and you will. But I'm offering you a foundation, a starting point that you've more than earned through years of self-reliance." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "I set up a trust for both you and Amanda when you were born. Your parents were supposed to use it for your education. They used yours to pay for Amanda's private college after she failed her entrance exams. They never touched Amanda's fund." Rachel felt her stomach drop. Another betrayal. Another piece of evidence that in her parents' eyes she had never mattered as much as her sister. "So now," her grandfather continued, "Amanda's fund will become yours. Poetic justice, perhaps." When Rachel received her acceptance letter into the graduate program in psychology at Michigan State University, along with a partial scholarship, her grandfather was the first person she threw her arms around, overwhelmed with joy. "You deserve this, Rachel," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "I'll take care of the rest. Just fly as high as you can." In that moment, Rachel knew she had finally found the anchor she had been missing her entire life, someone who believed in her without condition, who saw her potential and encouraged it, rather than seeing her strength as an excuse for neglect. At graduate school, Rachel slowly discovered what true friendship felt like. No one compared her to Amanda. No one dismissed or overlooked her efforts. They studied in groups, stayed up all night writing papers, and shared every moment of pressure and triumph together. For the first time, Rachel felt herself stepping out of the invisible shadow and being recognized for her own worth. She formed a particularly close bond with her classmate Olivia, a vibrant woman with curly hair and an infectious laugh, who recognized something in Rachel that needed healing. "You apologize too much," Olivia told her one day as they worked on research together. "You shrink yourself like you're afraid of taking up space." Rachel looked up, startled by the observation. "Do I?" "Yes, and you always seem surprised when professors praise your work, as if you can't quite believe you deserve recognition." The insight struck Rachel like a physical blow. Even here, hundreds of miles from her family, she was carrying their dismissive attitude within her, an internalized voice that continued to tell her she wasn't quite enough. "Old habits," Rachel said softly. "From home." Olivia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Well, you're not home anymore. And from where I'm sitting, you're pretty amazing." Whenever Rachel told her friends stories about her grandfather, they admired him deeply. And she realized then that sometimes family isn't the people who share your blood, but the ones who truly see you, understand you, and choose to walk beside you. But that peace didn't last long. Just a few days after she moved out, her phone began buzzing non-stop. Texts and calls from her parents flooded in, filled with apologies that sounded sweet on the surface, but hollow underneath. Rachel, we know we were wrong. We're family. Come back home. Don't make your grandfather angry anymore. Then another, I'm sorry, honey. I wasn't thinking clearly that day. Amanda is fragile. I was afraid she might do something foolish. Her father even called once in the middle of the night, his voice slurred with what Rachel suspected was alcohol. You're our flesh and blood. Are you really going to abandon us? It didn't take Rachel long to understand. None of these words came from love. They were nothing but tactics to pull her back, to make her soften, and to persuade her grandfather to restore the financial support they had lost. Each time her screen lit up with Mom or Dad, Rachel felt a wave of weariness. She thought back to her graduation night, walking across the stage to the applause of thousands, yet utterly alone. The only message from them, a cheap excuse to cover for Amanda. She knew clearly then they weren't missing her. They were missing the money her grandfather had sent. Still, Rachel didn't want to stay silent. A part of her wanted to test them to see if they could just once in their lives choose her over Amanda. So in one reply she wrote, I'll consider coming back only if Amanda moves out on her own. She's 25, she has a job, she has income. There's no reason for her to still cling to you. If you truly want me to return, let her stand on her own. Rachel knew that condition was like pressing a knife to their throats, because her parents had never been willing to let Amanda face the slightest hardship. But she never intended to return. This was only a test. She wanted to see their reaction, to know once and for all. Was there ever a place for her in their hearts? Or had it always been and would always be only Amanda? After sending that message, Rachel set her phone down, no longer trembling with fear as she once had. In fact, she felt a quiet sense of calm, because she knew she had finally drawn a boundary. If they chose Amanda, it would confirm everything she had endured for 22 years. And if by some miracle they chose her, maybe she would believe there was still a flicker of hope left for their family. But deep down, she already knew the answer. In the days that followed, her phone fell into an eerie silence. No more floods of messages, no more relentless calls. That silence was its own reply, and it carried both pain and release. In that quiet, Rachel realized something with absolute clarity. She had stopped waiting, stopped hoping. She no longer needed them, no longer longed for validation from people who had never once placed her first. She had her grandfather, she had a home, and most importantly, she had herself. One evening, as Rachel and her grandfather sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the Grand Rapids sky red, he placed his hand gently over hers and spoke in his calm, steady voice. Rachel, I know you've endured more than your share, but I am proud of you for standing up, for setting your own terms. That's not selfishness, it's self-respect. She nodded, her eyes stinging with tears. For the first time in her life, Rachel felt truly valuable. Not because of academic achievements, not because of carrying heavy burdens, but simply because she was herself. She lifted her eyes to the sky as it deepened into shades of violet. Thinking about the life ahead, there would be hardships. There would be challenges, but at least she knew she had cut the heavy chains that bound her for so many years. She was no longer a shadow, but an independent person, finally beginning to discover her true worth. And inside, she whispered to herself, I will never go back. Never. One late summer afternoon, after her last class of the day, Rachel walked out of the building with a heavy backpack slung over her shoulder. Golden sunlight stretched across the campus students, spilling out in laughter and chatter. She was about to head toward the parking lot when she froze. By the school gate, beneath the wide branches of a great oak, a familiar figure stood, arms crossed, sunglasses covering half her face. Even in her attempt to disguise herself, Rachel recognized her instantly. Amanda! Rachel's chest tightened, a bad premonition rising within her. She slowed her steps, considering turning away, but Amanda's voice cut sharply across the noise of the crowd. Rachel, we need to talk! Students nearby turned their heads, some whispering to each other. Rachel swallowed hard, then decided to face her sister instead of running. She had sworn to herself that she would never again let Amanda trample her. As Rachel walked closer, Amanda pulled off her sunglasses, her cold eyes locking onto Rachel's. You really are selfish. Mom and Dad are nearly losing their minds because of you. Why would you set such a ridiculous condition? You knew they could never make me move out, but you forced them to choose anyway. Do you really want to tear this family apart?" Amanda's voice rang high and sharp, deliberately loud enough for everyone around to hear. Rachel felt the curious stares closing in, but instead of trembling like before, she answered calmly. "If you recall, that exact line was why you stole my graduation from me. You said if you weren't happy, then I couldn't be happy either. Now I'm only giving back exactly what you sowed." Amanda's face flushed red, her lips pressed tight and trembling with fury. You! You dare compare that to this ridiculous condition? I'm the one carrying the pressure. I'm the one who needs protection. And you're always pretending to be the victim." Rachel smiled, the bitterness inside her hardening into something stronger. "You're right. I was the victim for 22 years, but not today. I won't let anyone, not even you, decide my worth ever again." Perhaps it was the calm in Rachel's voice that pushed Amanda over the edge. She suddenly screamed and lunged at Rachel, hands outstretched to shove hard. Rachel stepped back, but this time she didn't yield. Her hand shot forward, pushing back with enough force to make Amanda stumble and nearly fall. The students around them froze, some gasping aloud. Years of pent-up suppression surged through Rachel, and she was no longer the timid girl who endured in silence. She met her sister's eyes squarely, her voice sharp as steel. "Don't ever think I'll stay quiet and let you do whatever you want." Amanda shrieked again, this time reaching to grab Rachel's hair. But a group of Rachel's classmates quickly intervened. "Hey, what's wrong with her? Calm down." One boy pulled Amanda back while a girl held Rachel by the arm. Rachel's breathing came fast, her heart pounding, but beneath it was a surge of fierce satisfaction. For the first time, she hadn't backed down. For the first time, she had forced Amanda to stop in her tracks before her resistance. Amanda thrashed, trying to break free, spitting curses. "Traitor, you just want to tear this family apart. You'll regret this." But her voice grew shrill, out of place among the disapproving stares of the crowd. A few students raised their phones to record the scene. Rachel caught the flicker of fear in Amanda's eyes. She had always been obsessed with maintaining a flawless image on social media, and now here at the school gates, that image was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Rachel took one step forward, staring directly at the sister, who had been the nightmare of her childhood. Her voice was steady, each word carved into the ground like stone. "Amanda, you've taken too much from me already. But this ends here. If you ever lay a hand on me again, I will call the police, and this time you will be held accountable." With that, Rachel turned her back on Amanda without another glance, leaving her sister pinned in place under the weight of the crowd's judging eyes. On the way to the parking lot, Rachel's friends hurried after her, checking if she was all right, some patting her shoulder in quiet support. Rachel forced a smile, though inside her chest was still heaving with a storm. That confrontation wasn't just another fight. It was a turning point. She had stood up for herself. She had proven that she was no longer the weak shadow within the Morgan family. Amanda could scream, she could curse, but the truth was that she had just been humiliated in front of everyone. And for Rachel, that was the first real victory in reclaiming her worth. After such a fierce showdown at the school gates, Rachel thought Amanda would disappear for a while, or at least that her parents would try to smooth things over to save face. But only a few days later, while Rachel was sitting in the library preparing for an essay, her phone buzzed again. A long message appeared on the screen from the familiar group thread, Mom and Dad Family Group. Rachel's chest tightened with both curiosity and unease as she opened it. The first line hit her like a slap. "We've thought long and hard and we choose Amanda. You've become too cruel, Rachel. Don't ever come back." Rachel froze, her eyes glued to the screen. The words that followed cut even deeper. "All the effort we put into raising you is wasted. You are ungrateful, selfish, and only know how to cause division. We don't need a daughter like you anymore." Each sentence was like an icy knife. Yet strangely, Rachel didn't feel like she was about to shatter, as she once would have. Instead, a strange emptiness spread through her, and then slowly transformed into a calm so steady it surprised even her. She read that message over and over. They weren't even trying to hide their choice. They declared outright that Amanda was the priority, and Rachel was nothing more than a burden, a waste. In that moment, she understood this was the final answer to the 22 years she had spent waiting. She had once believed that maybe one day they would realize. They would change. They would look at her with pride. But no, the truth was they had never intended to choose her. And now they had finally said it out loud. Rachel set the phone down on the desk and drew in a long breath. Memories came flooding back her 15th birthday, with a tiny, quiet cake, the state scholarship that was ignored, and the hollow emptiness of her college graduation. All the time she had forced a smile, telling herself to be strong, convincing herself that if she just endured a little longer, she would be seen. But today's message was the final verdict. She didn't have to keep trying for them anymore. The phone buzzed again, more messages piling in, each longer and harsher than the last. You've torn this family apart. You're selfish, cruel, only thinking of yourself. If your grandfather knew what you were really like, he'd be disappointed too. Rachel stared at the words, and instead of pain, she felt a strange kind of amusement. They were still trying to manipulate her one last time, using guilt and fear to bind her the way they had for years. But this time she was no longer the small, enduring Rachel. She finally saw them for what they were. She opened the settings on her phone, scrolled down to the block list. Her hand pressed each button firmly without a second of hesitation, blocked every number, blocked every email, blocked the family group thread. When the final button was pressed, the screen went dark, silent at last. And in that silence, Rachel felt a weight lift, freedom, as though she had cut through the chain that had been strangling her for far too long. She sat still for a few minutes, and then a profound truth washed over her. Being cut off by them wasn't a loss, it was freedom. She hadn't lost parents because they were never truly her support to begin with. She hadn't lost a family because that family had always been nothing more than a facade built around Amanda. What she had blocked was only an illusion she had clung to for 22 years, a dream of love that had never existed. Rachel stood up and walked out of the library. The golden glow of sunset spilled across the campus, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. She drew in a deep breath, feeling as if she had been reborn. Her phone lay silent in her pocket, but her heart pounded with a new certainty that from now on, she would live her own life, no longer chained by their toxic favoritism. That evening, sitting on the porch with her grandfather, Rachel told him everything. He only nodded softly, his eyes filled with pride and a trace of sorrow. Rachel, sometimes blood family isn't the place where you'll find love and respect, but you had the courage to step away, and that's what matters. You're free now. Rachel smiled, warmth spreading through her. He was right. She had lost one family, but at the same time she had found a real one, beginning with her grandfather and with herself. In the months that followed, after Rachel had blocked every line of contact with her parents and Amanda, she was slowly building a new life. Meanwhile, in Detroit, the Morgan family they had so proudly flaunted to neighbors began spiraling into collapse. After her grandfather cut all financial support, her parents' small accounting firm couldn't hold out much longer. Contracts dried up, employees left one by one, and eventually the company went bankrupt. The house that once glowed with lights during Amanda's parties grew cold and silent, a for sale sign planted in the front yard like an epitaph to the so-called perfect family. Rachel heard from a few old acquaintances that her parents were slowly being shunned by the neighbors. People whispered about their favoritism, about how they had lost the trust of their own kin. The Morgan family, once mentioned as a model household in the neighborhood, was now nothing more than a subject of pity and gossip. Amanda, who had always lived sheltered and dependent, was eventually forced to move out and fend for herself. Rachel wasn't sure how she managed, only that her social media posts became fewer and fewer, no longer filled with glamorous images, but replaced with vague complaints. Some said she had found a regular job, nothing like the luxury she flaunted before. When Rachel heard this, she simply smiled. It wasn't joy at someone else's suffering. It was a long-delayed fairness, life finally forcing them to face the reality she had endured long ago. Time passed, and Rachel grew stronger in her new life. Whenever stress from coursework weighed her down, she remembered her grandfather's words. "Don't forget, you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. You study because you want to, because of your own worth. That unwavering trust was the guiding light that carried Rachel through each challenge. And then, at last, the important day arrived, her graduate school commencement. That morning, Rachel slipped into the deep green gown of Michigan State University, adjusting the cap carefully. As she entered the auditorium, the music swelled, but this time her heart wasn't heavy like it had been years earlier. She glanced toward the audience and immediately found her grandfather's eyes. He sat proudly in the front row, holding a bright bouquet of sunflowers. Beside him were the close friends she had shared her graduate years with, each waving signs with her name cheering at the top of their lungs. Rachel smiled, her eyes blurring with emotion when the announcer's voice rang out. Rachel Morgan, Master of Arts in Psychology. Rachel walked across the stage to the sound of thunderous applause. But unlike before this time, she truly felt surrounded, truly seen. She was no longer the daughter standing silently in a crowd before 3 cold, empty seats. She was herself Rachel Morgan, who had stood up, stepped out of the shadows, and found her real family. She accepted her degree, bowed in gratitude, then turned and smiled at her grandfather. That smile was no longer strained, no longer bitter, but the smile of freedom and happiness. In that moment, Rachel knew she had completed the journey. From a child overlooked in her own home to a woman grown free and secure in her own worth. As she scanned the auditorium one last time, her eyes caught a surprising sight. Far in the back, almost hidden in shadow, stood her parents. They hadn't been invited. They hadn't called to say they were coming. But there they were, watching silently, their expressions unreadable from this distance. Rachel felt a brief tightening in her chest, not longing, not even anger anymore, but something more complex. A recognition that some wounds never fully heal, but they do become part of the landscape of who we are. She gave a slight nod in their direction, acknowledging their presence without inviting them closer. Then she turned away to join her grandfather and friends, the people who had chosen to love her as she was. When the ceremony ended, Rachel stood among her friends and her grandfather, surrounded by laughter and voices of joy. And in her heart, she sent out a message to anyone listening to her story. Sometimes to find your true worth, you must dare to let go of blood ties and seek the family you choose. She had lost one family, but she had also found a real one. Sometimes silence has a price too high to pay. And sometimes speaking your truth, even when it costs you everything you thought you needed, is the only path to becoming whole. 3 years after leaving Detroit, Rachel sat in her new office at the University Counseling Center, where she had begun working after completing her master's degree. The walls were painted a soothing sage green, adorned with her framed degrees and carefully selected artwork depicting serene landscapes. A small fountain burbled quietly in the corner, creating a gentle background ambiance that helped her clients feel at ease. This space represented everything she had fought for: professional achievement, personal autonomy, and the right to create an environment that reflected her own preferences instead of yielding to others. She ran her fingers along the polished surface of her desk, still somewhat amazed that this life belonged to her. Today marked a significant milestone. Rachel had just been approved to start a support group specifically for young adults who had experienced family favoritism and conditional love. The idea had grown from her own healing journey and her graduate research on family dynamics and emotional neglect. She'd named it Shadows No More, a nod to her personal history and a promise to those who would join. As she reviewed her notes for the first session, her office phone rang. She answered with her professional voice. Rachel Morgan speaking. Ms. Morgan, this is Grace Chen from Detroit Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about Richard Evans. He's been admitted following a stroke, and you're listed as his emergency contact. The world tilted on its axis. Rachel gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles turning white, as the nurse continued explaining her grandfather's condition. Stable but serious, conscious but weak, asking for her. I'll be there as soon as possible, Rachel managed to say, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Within the hour, she had arranged emergency coverage for her clients, packed a small overnight bag, and was on the highway back to Detroit, a journey she hadn't made since the day she left. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 years ago, she had driven away from Detroit with her grandfather, beginning a new chapter. Now she was driving back alone, fearing an ending. Detroit Memorial Hospital rose like a concrete monolith against the gray January sky. Rachel parked in the visitor's lot, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The antiseptic smell hit her as soon as she entered that universal hospital scent that somehow managed to convey both sterility and sickness simultaneously. At the nurse's station, a kind-faced woman directed her to room 412. Rachel's footsteps echoed in the corridor. As she approached, her heart hammering against her ribs. She paused outside the door, gathering courage, then quietly pushed it open. Her grandfather lay against white pillows, somehow looking both smaller and more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. His skin had a grayish pallor, and various monitors beeped steadily beside him. But when he turned at the sound of the door, his eyes lit up with the same sharp intelligence and warmth she had always known. "Rachel," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "You came." "Of course I came." She rushed to his side, taking his hand in hers. It felt thinner, the skin more papery than she remembered. "How are you feeling?" Like a man who should have listened to his doctor about that blood pressure medication. He attempted a smile. "But better now that you're here." Rachel spent hours by his bedside, speaking with doctors, arranging for the best care, and simply being present. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic. With proper rehabilitation, her grandfather could recover much of his function, though he would need significant support during the process. As evening fell and visiting hours neared their end, her grandfather reached for her hand again. "Rachel," he said, his voice serious, "there's something you should know. I've made arrangements for you to stay at my house during my recovery." "Of course," she nodded. "I've already requested a leave of absence from work." "That's not all." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "The house in Grand Rapids is undergoing some renovations. It's not livable right now. You'll need to stay at the Detroit house." Rachel stiffened. "Your Detroit house? The one near—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "Yes, the one 3 blocks from your parents' home." His eyes held hers steadily. "I kept it all these years. Rented it out mostly, but the tenants moved out last month." Rachel's mind raced. Return to Detroit, live mere blocks from the family that had discarded her. The very thought made her stomach churn. "Grandpa, I don't know if I—" "Listen to me, Rachel." His voice grew stronger, more like the commanding tone she remembered from the day he had rescued her. "Running away served its purpose. It gave you space to grow to become who you are. But healing isn't complete until you can stand on the same ground where you were wounded and feel your own strength." Rachel looked away, her throat tight with emotion. "What if I'm not ready?" "Then you'll discover that too." He squeezed her hand. "Either way, knowledge is power. And you, my dear, have always been stronger than you believed." That night, Rachel drove through familiar streets to her grandfather's Detroit house, a modest craftsman-style home she had visited occasionally as a child. The key felt heavy in her hand as she unlocked the door, stepping into a space that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. She wandered through rooms that held echoes of her grandfather, but none of the painful memories associated with her parents' home. Still, simply being back in Detroit made her feel exposed, as if the protective layers she had built around herself over the past 3 years had suddenly thinned. Rachel moved to the window, peering out at the quiet street. Somewhere in this city, her parents and Amanda continued their lives. Did they ever think of her? Did they regret their choices? Or had they simply written her out of their story, the way they had always minimized her presence? She unpacked her small suitcase, arranged her toiletries in the bathroom, and tried to make the space feel like her own. But sleep eluded her that night, her dreams filled with fragments of the past. Amanda's smug smile, her mother's dismissive tone, her father's averted gaze. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, a familiar anxiety clawing at her chest. "I'm not that person anymore," she whispered to the darkness. "I am not invisible. I am not secondary. I am whole on my own." The words helped, but the uneasiness lingered like a shadow at the edge of her consciousness. Over the next few days, Rachel established a routine. Mornings at the hospital with her grandfather, afternoons handling his affairs, or working remotely on her own projects, evenings alone in the quiet house. She ordered groceries for delivery, not quite ready to risk running into familiar faces at local stores. A week into her stay, Rachel was reviewing her grandfather's financial documents at his request when she discovered something unexpected. There, in a folder labeled Morgan Family, were records of payments not to her parents, as she had known about, but to Amanda directly. Monthly deposits to a separate account in her sister's name, continuing until just 6 months ago. Rachel stared at the paper's confusion, and a twinge of betrayal washing over her. Why had her grandfather continued to support Amanda in secret? Why had he stopped? And why had he never mentioned this? That afternoon at the hospital, while her grandfather napped, Rachel slipped out to the cafeteria for coffee and found herself face to face with a ghost from her past. Standing in line just 3 people ahead of her was Amanda. Her sister looked different, thinner, less polished, her once perfect hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore scrubs navy blue with the hospital logo embroidered on the pocket. When she turned and their eyes met, Amanda froze coffee cup halfway to her lips. For a long moment, neither spoke. Around them, the cafeteria buzzed with activity. Doctors consulting charts, visitors seeking momentary respite, staff grabbing quick meals. But between the Morgan sisters, time seemed suspended. Rachel found her voice first. "You work here." Amanda nodded, a flush rising to her cheeks. "Nursing assistant. I'm in nursing school." Nursing school. The words felt strange in Rachel's mouth. Amanda had always dismissed healthcare as too depressing and not glamorous enough. "Yeah." Amanda looked down at her cup. "It's been a change." An awkward silence fell between them. Rachel noticed that Amanda's nails were short, unpolished, practical for hospital work. Another departure from the sister she had known. "I heard about Grandpa," Amanda finally said. "I've seen his name on the patient roster. How is he?" "Stable, getting stronger." Rachel's answers came out clipped, guarded. Amanda nodded again. "That's good. He's always been tough." She hesitated, then added, "Like you." The comparison startled Rachel. Never once had Amanda acknowledged any strength in her. "I should get back to my floor," Amanda said, shifting uncomfortably. "My break's almost over." "Right, of course." Rachel stepped aside, allowing her sister to pass. Amanda had taken a few steps when she stopped and turned back. "Rachel, I'm glad he has you." The words seemed wrenched from somewhere deep, painful in their sincerity. Before Rachel could respond, Amanda was gone, disappearing into the hospital corridor, leaving Rachel with a half-formed thought and a sudden, unexpected ache. That evening, when her grandfather was awake and alert, Rachel pulled the financial records from her bag and placed them on his tray table. "You've been supporting Amanda," she said, not a question but a statement. "All this time." Her grandfather regarded her steadily. "Yes." "Why, after everything? After what they did? Why would you keep giving her money?" He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "It wasn't a gift, Rachel, it was a condition." "A condition?" "Amanda came to me about 6 months after you left. Your parents' business had failed. They'd had to sell the house. She was living in a shared apartment, working retail, struggling." He adjusted himself against the pillows. "She asked for money, of course, but I saw something in her I hadn't seen before, a kind of desperation that went beyond financial need." Rachel listened, her heart beating an uncomfortable rhythm against her ribs. "I made her a deal," he continued. "I would provide a modest stipend, enough to keep her afloat, but not enough for luxury, on 2 conditions. First, she had to move out completely from your parents' new apartment and live independently. Second, she had to enroll in education for a practical career, something that would eventually allow her to support herself." "And she agreed?" Rachel couldn't hide her surprise. "Not immediately. She argued, tried to manipulate me the way she'd always manipulated your parents." A small smile touched his lips. "But I'm somewhat immune to theatrical tears. Eventually she realized I meant what I said. It was grow up or go without. So she chose nursing school." Rachel shook her head, still struggling to reconcile this new information with the sister she had known. She chose several things, first photography courses, interior design things she thought would be easy or glamorous. None of them stuck. Nursing was her fifth attempt, I believe. But something changed when she started working with patients. Your sister, for perhaps the first time in her life, discovered what it means to be truly needed by someone else. Rachel sat back processing this revelation. I saw her today, in the cafeteria. She looks different. She is different. Not completely transformed, people rarely are, but changed in ways that matter. He reached for Rachel's hand. The payments stopped 6 months ago because she asked me to stop them. She said she was making enough as a nursing assistant to cover her basic needs, and her clinical rotations were going well. She wanted to try standing on her own. Why didn't you tell me? The question held no accusation, just genuine curiosity. Because you needed clean separation to heal. Because knowing about Amanda might have pulled you back into old patterns before you were ready. His eyes, tired but clear, met hers. And because, Rachel, your journey and hers are separate paths. What happens to Amanda isn't your responsibility, for good or ill. Later that night, back at the house, Rachel sat on the porch swing processing the day's revelations. The air was cold, her breath forming small clouds in the January night. But she welcomed the chill as it helped clarify her thoughts. Amanda was changing. The sister who had basked in unearned privilege was now earning her way. The girl who had never considered others' feelings was learning to care for the sick. It didn't erase the past. It didn't heal the wounds of 22 years of being secondary and visible less than. But it complicated the neat narrative Rachel had constructed, the story of the selfish sister and the victimized one. People could change. Not easily, not quickly, and perhaps never completely. But they could change. As this thought settled, Rachel noticed a car slowing in front of the house. A modest sedan, nothing like the luxury vehicle her parents had once maintained for appearance's sake. It idled for a moment, then continued down the street. But not before Rachel caught a glimpse of the driver. Her mother hair now streaked with more gray than she remembered, face turned toward the house with an expression Rachel couldn't decipher from a distance. They knew she was back. Whether Amanda had told them or they had somehow discovered it independently, they knew. And now the possibility of an encounter hung in the air, like the threat of an approaching storm. 3 days later, the inevitable happened. Rachel was returning to her grandfather's house after an encouraging session with his physical therapist when she saw her parents standing uncertainly on the sidewalk in front of the house. They looked older, diminished somehow. Her father's confident posture had given way to a slight stoop. Her mother, once meticulous about her appearance, wore a simple coat with a Walgreens name tag still clipped to the lapel. Rachel stopped her car at the curb, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. For a moment she considered driving past, circling the block until they left. But her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Healing isn't complete until you can stand on the same ground where you were wounded and feel your own strength. She took a deep breath, turned off the engine, and stepped out to face the authors of her childhood pain. Rachel. Her mother spoke first, her voice catching. You look well. I am well, Rachel responded, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Why are you here? Her parents exchanged glances. Her father cleared his throat. We heard about your grandfather. Amanda told us you were staying here. And Rachel kept her tone neutral, neither inviting nor dismissing. And we wanted to see you, her mother said. It's been 3 years. 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days, Rachel corrected quietly. Since you told me never to come back. Since you said I was ungrateful, selfish, and a waste of your efforts. Her mother flinched as her own words returned to her. We were wrong to say those things. We were desperate, afraid of losing Grandpa's money, Rachel finished for her. Not afraid of losing me. Her father stepped forward. That's not fair, Rachel. We've lost everything, the house, the business, our standing in the community. Do you think that hasn't changed us? Taught us anything? I don't know what it's taught you, Rachel replied honestly. I only know what losing you taught me, that I'm stronger than I thought, that I'm worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions, that silence in the face of injustice costs too much. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. We made terrible mistakes, treated you unfairly, put Amanda's needs above yours in ways that were inexcusable. She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, holding it out with a trembling hand. We don't expect forgiveness, but we wanted you to have this. Rachel hesitated, then accepted the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, the paper slightly crumpled, as if it had been written discarded and smoothed out multiple times. She glanced at it, catching phrases, "deeply sorry," "no excuse," "ashamed of our behavior," but couldn't bring herself to read it fully in their presence. "I'll read it later," she said, tucking it into her coat pocket. "We'd like to visit your grandfather," her father said. "If that's all right with you. We know the hospital would allow us as extended family, but we wanted to ask your permission first." The request surprised Rachel. This small acknowledgement of her role as gatekeeper of her right to establish boundaries was something entirely new from the parents who had always steamrolled her preferences. "I'll ask him if he wants visitors," she replied carefully. "It's his decision, not mine." They nodded, accepting this limitation without protest, another departure from the parents she had known. "Amanda said he's getting better," her mother ventured. "That's wonderful news." "Yes, it is." Rachel found herself unwilling to share more details of her grandfather's condition, maintaining this small boundary as a test. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with 3 years of absence and 22 years of imbalance. Finally, her father spoke again. "We won't keep you. Thank you for talking to us at all. We know we don't deserve even that much." As they turned to leave, Rachel felt a question rise to her lips, one she hadn't known she needed to ask until this moment. "Are you proud of Amanda for nursing school?" Her parents paused, exchanging another look that Rachel couldn't quite interpret. "Yes," her mother said softly, "but not in the way we were before. Not because she's special or perfect or better than—" She stopped herself, seeming to realize the dangerous territory she was approaching. "We're proud of her for finally growing up, for doing something meaningful rather than just seeking attention." "She still has a long way to go," her father added, surprising Rachel with this candid assessment of his once golden child. "But she's trying, really trying for the first time." They stood awkwardly for another moment before her mother spoke again. "Goodbye, Rachel. Thank you for the work you've done with your grandfather. He's lucky to have you." As they walked to their car, a used model at least 10 years old, Rachel noted she felt no triumph at their reduced circumstances, no satisfaction in the reversal of fortunes that had her stable and successful while they struggled. Instead, she felt something unexpected pity mixed with the faintest stirring of respect for their willingness to face her at all. That evening, alone in her grandfather's house, Rachel finally opened the letter. The handwriting was her mother's neat, but showing signs of hesitation, in places where the pen had lingered too long or pressed too hard. "Dear Rachel," it began, "there are no words adequate to express the depth of our regret for the way we treated you throughout your life. We failed you as parents in the most fundamental ways. We showed unconscionable favoritism toward Amanda and denied you the love, support, and recognition that were your birthright." Rachel read on, tears blurring her vision. As the letter continued, detailing specific incidents her parents remembered, acknowledging the pattern of neglect and expressing genuine remorse without excuses. They described how losing everything had forced them to confront their misplaced values and the damage they had caused. "We do not ask for forgiveness," the letter concluded. "We have not earned it. We only want you to know that we recognize the pain we caused, that we are profoundly sorry, and that we are trying to become better people, the kind of people who would never treat a child as we treated you. If someday you wish to have any contact with us, we would welcome it on whatever terms you set. If not, we understand and will respect your decision. Either way, we are deeply proud of the woman you have become, not despite us, but in defiance of us, with love and deepest regrets, Mom and Dad." Rachel sat with the letter in her lap long after she'd finished reading it. The apology was more thorough, more specific, and more genuine than she had ever expected to receive. It acknowledged her pain without minimizing it. It placed no burden of reconciliation on her shoulders. It was in many ways exactly what she had needed to hear for most of her life, and yet she felt strangely hollow. The apology couldn't erase the years of being overlooked, couldn't restore the childhood she deserved, couldn't heal all the wounds that had shaped her. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a single moment of absolution, but a complex, ongoing process, one she wasn't sure she was ready to begin. 2 weeks later, her grandfather was discharged from the hospital. Rachel arranged for in-home care and physical therapy at his Grand Rapids house, which had been hastily prepared for his return. On their last day in Detroit, as she helped him pack his few personal items from the hospital room, he asked the question she had been expecting. "Did you read their letter?" Rachel nodded. "Yes." And she carefully folded his robe, taking time to organize her thoughts. "It was a good letter, sincere, I think. But I'm not ready to let them back in. I'm not sure I ever will be." He nodded, accepting her position without judgment. "What about Amanda?" The question was more complicated. In the weeks since their cafeteria encounter, Rachel had seen her sister several more times at the hospital. Their interactions had been brief, professional. Amanda checking her grandfather's vital signs, bringing medication, performing the routine tasks of a nursing assistant. But there had been something different in these encounters, a humility in Amanda that Rachel had never witnessed before. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "She's changing, or trying to, but there's so much history between us." "Indeed there is." Her grandfather adjusted his glasses, regarding her thoughtfully. "You know, Rachel, forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let the past determine your future. Sometimes the person who benefits most from forgiveness is the one who offers it." "Is that why you helped Amanda, as a form of forgiveness?" He smiled, a twinkle appearing in his eyes despite his weakened state. "No, my dear. I helped Amanda because beneath all that entitlement and manipulation, I saw a lost young woman who'd never been taught how to exist without being the center of attention. I thought perhaps she deserved one chance to discover who she might become without your parents' distorting influence." He reached for Rachel's hand. "Just as you deserve the chance to discover who you are outside their shadow." The day they left Detroit, Rachel stopped by the hospital one last time to thank the staff who had cared for her grandfather. As she was leaving, she spotted Amanda coming off her shift, looking tired, but somehow more substantial than the sister she remembered, as if the work of caring for others had given her a gravity she had previously lacked. Their eyes met across the lobby. Rachel hesitated, then walked over. "We're heading back to Grand Rapids today," she said. "Grandpa's been discharged." Amanda nodded. "That's great news. His recovery has been impressive." "Yes, it has." Rachel paused, searching for the right words. "I wanted to say, I can see you're working hard here. That's good." A flush of color touched Amanda's cheeks. "Thanks, it's not what I expected to be doing with my life, but it turns out I'm not bad at it." Another silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken history. "I got their letter," Rachel finally said. "Oh." Amanda looked down at her sensible white shoes. "They've changed, Rachel. We all have. After you left and Grandpa cut us off, everything fell apart so fast. The business, the house, their friends all gone. Mom works at Walgreens now. Dad delivers packages for Amazon. It's been humbling." "And you, what happened to you?" Amanda met her gaze directly, something flickering in her eyes that might have been shame. "I crashed hard, tried to keep up appearances on social media while living in a terrible apartment with 3 roommates working retail jobs I kept losing because I thought I was too good for them." She gave a small self-deprecating laugh. "Turns out when you've been told you're special your whole life, it's quite a shock to discover you're completely ordinary." Rachel said nothing, waiting. "When I went to Grandpa for money, I thought it would be easy. Flash some tears, tell a sad story. It always worked with Mom and Dad." Amanda twisted the strap of her bag. "But he saw right through me. Offered help with conditions I hated but needed. The nursing thing. I only tried it because nothing else was working out. But then I had this patient elderly woman, no family, so scared. And somehow I knew how to comfort her. Me, who'd never thought about anyone but myself." She shook her head as if still surprised by the memory. It changed something in me. Rachel absorbed this, trying to reconcile the self-aware young woman before her with the sister who had stolen her graduation day, who had demanded all the family's attention for decades. I don't expect us to ever be close, Amanda continued. I know what I did to you was unforgivable, years of it, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see how wrong it all was. And I'm sorry, Rachel. Truly sorry. The apology hung in the air between them, genuine but insufficient to bridge the chasm of their shared past. Rachel found she didn't know how to respond, couldn't offer easy forgiveness, but couldn't reject the evident sincerity either. I have to go, she said finally. Grandpa's waiting. Amanda nodded, accepting this non-answer with a grace that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. Safe travels. Take care of him and yourself. As Rachel walked away, she felt something shift within her. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first loosening of a knot that had been tightly bound around her heart for as long as she could remember. The pain was still there. The memories hadn't changed. But something else had changed the power those memories held over her present and future. Driving back to Grand Rapids with her grandfather dozing in the passenger seat, Rachel thought about silence and its cost. For years, she had remained silent, accepting her role as the overlooked child, the one expected to yield. That silence had nearly erased her. Breaking it had been terrifying, but necessary, the first step toward reclaiming herself. Now she faced a different kind of silence, the quiet space of healing where new choices could be made. She didn't know yet what relationship, if any, she might eventually have with her parents or Amanda, but she knew with absolute certainty that whatever she chose would come from strength, not obligation, from wisdom, not fear. The highway stretched before them, carrying them away from Detroit once more. But this time Rachel wasn't fleeing. She was moving forward by choice, her past acknowledged, but no longer defining her. The price of silence, she thought, glancing at her grandfather's peaceful face, is far too high, but the reward for speaking your truth, that's beyond measure.